It's so easy to be average. It takes a little something to be special, doesn't it? It takes a little something special to be a great player. Did you push yourself to be great today?
Yeah. The man of Scarlet and Gray. Yeah.
Let's go.
The man of Scarlet and Gray. What we reading now? Who we listen to? Who we rocking with?
The man of Scarlet and Gray.
Who we vibing with? Who we riding with? Who we clapping for love?
The man of Scarlet and Gray.
What we reading now? Who we listen to? Who we rocking with?
The man of Scarlet and Gray.
Who we vibing with? Who we riding with? Who we clapping for love?
The Scarlet and Gray.
It's time for it. You ready for it? It's MotSaG. You better know it. Let's go Bucks. Every time. Hating on us, you better get
Your undisputed source of all things Ohio State. This is the Men of the Scarlet and Gray podcast. Here's your hosts, Shannon Summers and Chip Minnick.
The man of Scarlet and Gray.
Buckeye Nation, welcome to another great edition of Men of the Scarlet and Gray here on Buckeye Sports Radio, a V-Sporto channel. I'm your host, Chip Minnick, writer and editor for menofthescarletandgray.com. I'm honored to be joined by my co-host, Shannon Summers, also a fellow writer and editor for menofthescarletandgray.com. Shannon, how are you doing today?
I'm having withdrawals.
I think we all are.
Yeah, having withdrawals that there's no Buckeye football, and after watching the Army-Navy game, realizing that was the last regular season game, the withdrawals have already starting to set in.
Well, bowl season is upon us, so we are ready to do another great podcast for our listeners as we will be discussing Ohio State's selection to the 2016 Fiesta Bowl against Notre Dame. We will also discuss the Adolphus Washington suspension from the Fiesta Bowl, and we'll look at all of the bowl games involving the Big Ten. Lastly, Shannon and I will answer the questions that have been submitted for our Ask MotSaG session. Before we get into our podcast, we wanted to remind you about the Buckeye Sports Radio app available on your favorite iOS or Android devices. I have it on my iPhone, and I know Shannon uses it on his Android. It's a must-have for any Buckeye fan who wants the latest and greatest Ohio State news and information. All right, so Shannon, let's just get into it. What are your thoughts on the 2016 Fiesta Bowl against Notre Dame? Are you happy with it? Are you unhappy with it? Are you surprised? Are you displeased? I mean, what are your general thoughts?
On our last show, we were sitting there talking about the possibilities for Ohio State. I know that we were kind of hoping North Carolina beat Clemson and all that kind of stuff. The fact of the matter is you knew 90% of that stuff wasn't going to happen to begin with. Ohio State lost to Sparty. Good luck, Sparty. Bring home the hardware. Keep it in the Big Ten. But the biggest thing was, when we were talking last time, you made mention that the options for Ohio State, if they weren't able to get into the playoffs, was there'd be the Fiesta Bowl against Notre Dame and the Rose Bowl against Stanford. Well, when Iowa was winning, it looked like we were going to the Rose Bowl, but Sparty came up and pulled it off. Iowa deserves to go to the Rose Bowl based on a simple fact, one more game. They were undefeated during the regular season. I don't care what their schedule was, like we were talking a few minutes ago. The Fiesta Bowl is fitting, and what other team to play than my favorite non-conference team, the one team that doesn't want to pick an opponent or pick a conference and thinks they're better than everybody else, which that's another subject for an Ask MotSaG question, I guess. Getting to play the Fighting Irish, I think it's going to be kind of cool again. The last time we played the Fighting Irish, I can't remember if it was the Fiesta Bowl or what, but we put a pretty good licking on them. So I'm happy that we got a New Year's Six Bowl.
Well, I wrote something about the Fiesta Bowl for the menofthescarletandgray.com a week ago, but just to kind of, if anyone hasn't read the article or hasn't seen the article, I kind of look at it like Ohio State, yes, they are arguably talented enough to be in the playoffs, and I believe that Ohio State would do well in the playoffs. But in my heart of hearts, I truly can't say that they are deserving to be in the playoffs after not only losing to Michigan State, but also just for their overall performance this entire season. And kind of, not to, regurgitate the article that I wrote, if you think about it as objectively as you can, and I know it's very difficult as an Ohio State fan to do this, and you think about throughout the entire season, the performances that Ohio State had, you saw Ohio State come out and they played tremendously against Virginia Tech in the season opener, the game that you went to in New Jersey when they played at Rutgers, and the final game against that team up north in Ann Arbor. But by and large, throughout the entire season, it was kind of, we'll get it all figured out. That was kind of I'm not saying that the player said this or the coaches said this, but it just seemed there was this prevalent attitude of, against Michigan State and against that team up north, we'll have it all figured out. We'll play what we're capable of doing. And when it came time to against Michigan State, they came out flat. You can make the argument that maybe the coaches put them in bad situations, but the reality is Michigan State outplayed Ohio State. I was there. People saw it on national television. So in my estimation, Ohio State winding up against Notre Dame as tremendous of a bowl game as you could possibly have hoped for.
Yeah, I agree. You can't complain. Like you said, they were definitely not deserving of getting into the playoffs. I mean, if the chips fell where everybody was kind of hoping, they might have been able to sneak in there, but still, you got to take care of business, and unfortunately, they didn't take care of business. Whether it was, like we said, the coaches, the team, it was just a combination of everything.
And the thing is, as it gets closer to the Fiesta Bowl, we'll go into greater detail about the matchup against Notre Dame.
Oh, yes.
In terms of, I'm intrigued by it. I think Chris Spielman the other day, he made a tremendous point that, and I don't want to get into all of the speculation as to which underclassmen from Ohio State are going to declare, because until I see it or you see it or until it becomes public knowledge, I realize that a lot of our fans of the podcast out there have a pretty good idea as to which players are rumored to be leaving and all that. But Chris Spielman made a really good point that Ohio State has a number of talented individuals who are going to be first-round draft choices. As much as I know it bothers you and may dismay you to believe this, Notre Dame actually has 3 projected first-round draft choices as well, maybe even 4, depending on if all of their players necessarily declare. So you're talking about a very talented group of players on either side of the ball, regardless of whether you're rooting for Ohio State or for Notre Dame. The NFL scouts are going to be out there in droves to see how this one matches up on January 1st.
Oh, without a doubt. And if you start looking at the numbers, which later shows we'll start getting into and starting to break down video and stuff like that, you'll see that both teams are pretty close, pretty identical in a lot of ways as far as stats and everything. So I think it's going to be a really good game. I mean, not going to be cheering for the golden helmets or whatever you want to call them, the whatever, but it's going to be a very interesting game and a lot of talent on the field. And as far as people that are going to be leaving early, the only projection I'm going to make, and I'm going to go out on a limb on this one, is Ezekiel Elliott's going early.
That's a fair projection right there. I think it's fair to say. But yeah, it's one of these things. I realize that it sounds like I'm trying to be cagey or trying to kind of some kind of a hook or dare, to come back and hear what we say. But there have been stranger things that have happened where players that were widely suspected or speculated to be leaving have said at the last minute, something, I'm going to come back. And on the other hand, players that you never would have suspected. So it's just, I think it serves our podcast and our listening audience so much better not to necessarily, with the exception of Ezekiel Elliott, since he said the same thing.
And Cardell Jones.
Yes. As they are the only two that have publicly made their intentions known, so to speak, to kind of speculate as to who is going and who is not until it actually comes to pass. I'd prefer not to get into those kind of speculative games. So
Exactly. And that's one thing we haven't done as far as our shows for anything. So we'll just keep the trend going.
Keep the trend going. So it promises to be a great matchup. As I said a few moments ago, the idea that we will go into greater detail as it gets closer to the Fiesta Bowl. Promise our listening audience we will do so. Unfortunately, we do, and this is not a brand new news to anyone who has been paying attention. Ohio State will be without the services of Adolphus Washington, who was suspended for the Fiesta Bowl. So essentially, his Ohio State career is over. I will say that the suspension caught me somewhat by surprise, but on the other hand, it didn't. I realize I'm kind of talking on both sides there in the sense that for what Adolphus Washington did, which was a terrible lapse of judgment, and I'm not here to get into the ethical areas because, again, I think what's that expression about people in glass houses shouldn't be casting stones kind of a thing. So, yeah, it was very, very surprising to see the news that he was arrested for solicitation and promptly suspended by Coach Meyer. The reason why I was kind of surprised, I truly thought the fact that the public humiliation and embarrassment of the news of the arrest, I thought that might be enough to justify, all right, allowing him to play, maybe suspending him even for the first quarter or maybe the first half. But I do want to applaud Coach Meyer for suspending Adolphus Washington in the sense that sometimes when a player, and this is not meant as an indictment against Adolphus Washington's character, but if a player makes a bad choice, that the coach, in this case, Urban Meyer, is left with little to no other option but to reinforce the consequences of that bad decision. I kind of look at it in the sense that having children of my own, that old expression of this hurts me, just as much, if not more so than it's going to hurt you kind of a thing. I'm sure Urban Meyer isn't happy to be doing it, would obviously prefer not to be doing it, but I can certainly, for all the critics around the country that have accused Urban Meyer of being lax on discipline, this again just merely goes to reinforce the reputation that he's developed at Ohio State about being strong on discipline. He was with J.T. Barrett earlier this season against Minnesota by suspending him a game, suspending Adolphus Washington for the Fiesta Bowl in what would be Adolphus Washington's last collegiate game. I think, again, just really shows that he's very, very strong on discipline despite what all the critics say.
Well, it's funny you mention that because naturally, Urban Meyer and the Buckeyes are back in the spotlight because somebody does something that's illegal, a lapse of judgment. Like you said, we're not going to get on a moral high ground or anything like that. You hear a lot of these national pundits or such. A lot of them have been saying, well, Urban did the right thing this time by suspending Adolphus for one game. Just goes to show that JT should have been suspended for more than one game. Again, back to the whole JT thing. When everybody else in the country suspends a player for DUI for one game, there's no difference than Ohio State doing it. That being said, I really wasn't surprised that Urban came out and suspended him because of his stance against anything towards women, violent or anything other. And I think that this kind of slaps women in the face, in a sense, by doing stuff like this. Step off the soapbox for the morality of it, but it's just, I think that as soon as I read it, I knew that he was going to be suspended and his career was going to be over. And it's sad. I love watching him play. I think he had an outstanding year this year. Might take a little bit of a tumble for his lapse in judgment for his his NFL stock, but everybody makes their choices and you have to live with the consequences afterwards.
As we said, as it gets closer to the game, you and I will be able to kind of get an idea as to the other players who will be called upon to fill in for Adolphus Washington, like the names like Michael Hill and Donovan Munger. Yeah, we'll get to Joey Bosa here in a minute. But other defensive linemen who will be called upon. That, if anything, from an Ohio State fan perspective, think of this as like a sneak preview for 2016 in the sense that Adolphus Washington was going to be gone anyway. So
Right.
This is, for Ohio State fans kind of wondering what the interior of the defensive line is going to look like. This has been a long area of concern for me, that the depth at defensive tackle is not nearly as strong as it is at defensive end. We just, as you just mentioned, Joey Bosa being moved to possibly at defensive tackle. So it's, like I said, there's some serious consequences to Adolphus Washington's suspension.
Yeah, it's defensively, it's going to hurt them in a sense, but at the same time, just like an injury, next man up. And Ohio State's been having that mantra for how long? And it's funny that we're playing Notre Dame, a team that has lost how many key starters, and they've gone with the next man up mantra and only lost 2 games so far this year. So it's just, you have to move on.
So as we promised, we will get into greater detail about the 2016 Fiesta Bowl, into greater detail about areas of concern, of strength, of weakness, however you want to phrase them, as it gets closer to the game. But we did want to touch on just kind of our initial thoughts of Ohio State being picked for the Fiesta Bowl. Want to congratulate Michigan State and Iowa for a very well-played, tenacious Big Ten championship game. I immediately tweeted out, I'm not sure if you saw it, to Hondo Carpenter, my first thoughts after watching that, because that drive was, it seemed like it was never ending, but it kind of reminded me at the end, it kind of reminded me of kind of dating myself. Like I felt like I was watching like a Rocky Balboa, Apollo Creed fight, at the end.
Yeah.
I mean, it was who wants it more, who's not going to relent, who is going to be the last one standing. It was the way that it ended, as you said. It was as soon as LJ Scott was able to get the ball across the goal line.
And he fought every little bit to get that across. Yeah, and he fought that to get that across the goal line. I mean, he was stopped behind, but it was, like you said, that was a perfect analogy of the Rocky fighting and stuff.
Yeah.
And Sparty got it because they wanted it more, apparently.
Yeah.
And my hat's off. Everybody says that Iowa, is terrible and stuff like that, but man, I tell you what, Iowa secondary, those guys are really, really good. And I think it was King. Every time that he was going defensively against somebody, you see a lot of the defensive backs have the other arm on the shoulder or something like that. He was truly knocking everything out with just one hand and not even grabbing with the other hand or anything. He's really the real deal as far as defensive backs.
So that's as nice, I think, of a segue as we could possibly hope for. You are listening to Men of the Scarlet and Gray here on Buckeye Sports Radio.
One's a riverboat gambler, picking with his gut. The other is cold, calculating, which makes Vegas nervous. Now it's time for MotSaG's Pick'Em. Who are you going to ride with?
We take a look at the other bowl games that have been designated for the Big Ten Conference. So in chronological order, why don't we kind of give it doesn't have to be lengthy, but our thoughts and perspectives on all the different Big Ten games, opportunities. If you don't have to work, here's a great way. As you said, you're kind of going, I know Shannon, you're going through withdrawal. I know I am, with bowl season upon us. These are some games that are going to be starting right around the holidays. The first one on the docket for the Big Ten, December 26th at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the Pinstripe Bowl in New York City it's going to be Indiana facing Duke on ABC. What are your first thoughts on this matchup?
That's going to be a pretty good game. Duke's been getting better, although, this year didn't seem like they had that great of a year like years past. Indiana, offensively, as we've seen against Ohio State and that team up north, they can bring it. Defensively, they have some issues. So the positive on this is getting the extra 15 days of practice, I believe it is. start getting ready for next year. But I'm going to go on a limb just because Big Ten and everything, and I want to root for the Big Ten. I mean, you got 9 teams playing in the bowl games. Sure, 2 of them probably don't deserve it with losing records, which we can get into here in a few. But I'm going to go with the Hoosiers on this one.
I agree. I think the Hoosiers offensively are going to be a very difficult game for Duke. Even though Duke, I want to give a quick shout out to Jeremy Cash of Duke, who was named to an All-American team. For those Ohio State fans who may recall the name Jeremy Cash played for Ohio State back in 2011 and transferred immediately after the 2011 season to Duke. So he's had a tremendous career at Duke, but I kind of taking the attitude of, once a Buckeye, still a Buckeye kind of a mindset. Getting back to Indiana, I think they are going to be too much for Duke to handle. I think it would be a tremendous way for Kevin Wilson to finish off the 2015 season with a win over Duke in the Pinstripe Bowl on December 26th. So also on December 26th, later that evening, 9:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time kickoff, the Foster Farms Bowl. You just mentioned it. A team with a losing record, Nebraska.
The first team with the losing record.
Yeah, Nebraska versus UCLA on ESPN. So what are your thoughts about the Foster Farms Bowl?
Well, I know based on, I think it was Nebraska, might have been Kansas State, and Minnesota. They were the first 3 teams with losing records allowed in because they had too many bowls and not enough eligible teams, so they had to start going with the losing records, and I think they went with the APR or something like that.
That's correct.
So, and that's why some of the teams were ineligible, was because of their APR. Nebraska had the best out of the losing teams. Then I think it was Kansas State was second and Minnesota was third. I think Illinois was like fourth, so they were just on the outside looking in. So unfortunately, they're not going to get one. But Nebraska seemed to turn a lot of things around. They had a lot of bad things happen, bad plays, lost at the end. UCLA was one of my picks to go to the national championship. Unfortunately, everything for that team just fell apart. I don't know the direction that they're heading, but it seems that with Nebraska, hopefully, like I said with the Indiana, these extra practices and everything, and all this time with Mike Riley as their coach, hopefully they're going to get everything in sync and everybody's finally starting to be on that same page, gearing up for next year and going out with pride, trying to get to 6-6, I believe. No, it would be 6-7. I think the record would be. So they're trying to get closer to 500 and not be as embarrassed, basically, for having a losing record as they are. So I'm gonna go with the Cornhuskers.
I hope you're right, because I would like to see it for Big Ten pride. I'm a real big fan of Josh Rosen of UCLA. I think he is a tremendous talent at the quarterback position, and I'm not sure what the mindset is for Nebraska. I think they not only had so many close losses, but I think they were really hoping to play better than they did against Iowa in the season finale, and I'm not sure what their mindset is. It wouldn't surprise me if Nebraska came out and played lights out, but I'm going to go with UCLA here in the Foster Farms Bowl. That's just, I hope I'm mistaken though, for the Big Ten's sake. So December 28th, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the Quick Lane Bowl, another team with a losing record. You just mentioned them a moment ago, Minnesota versus Central Michigan. This game will be telecast on ESPN2. What are your thoughts about this one?
I think it's great. Minnesota's getting a bowl, just rewarding their coach that they actually made official, I think a few weeks before the end of the season, that he's going to, he is the head coach. So that's all done and put behind them. Biggest concern with Minnesota is their offense. They are lacking offense, but their defense is pretty stout. So I think that Minnesota gets a turnover in order to be able to pull off the victory, and I'm going to go with the Golden Gophers.
I agree with you. I think Minnesota defensively is strong enough against, I don't want to say a tough MAC opponent, but a decent MAC opponent. I think that will be the difference. I think Minnesota I think it probably means more to Minnesota to be in this bowl game, as you mentioned, having a losing record and the fact that Central Michigan, I'm not sure how much of a reward they look at this as. So I'm gonna agree with you. I think Minnesota in a close one over Central Michigan in the Quick Lane Bowl. December 30th, 10:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the Holiday Bowl on ESPN, Wisconsin versus USC.
This is an interesting matchup. USC got their head coach, who is their intern coach. They made it interesting against Stanford towards the end, but the biggest thing with Wisconsin is this Wisconsin's offensive line. I know they took a hit by losing one of their offensive linemen. They're not as stout as far as running, and I think I'm not sure what the situation with the running back. I forget his name off the top of my head.
Corey Carpenter.
With his, if he's having some kind of legal problems or whatnot with whatever happened there. So it's going to be interesting, but unfortunately, I mean, as much as I want to stick with the Big Ten, I got to go with the Trojans on this one.
I agree with you. I think Wisconsin, I don't want to say that they ended their regular season on a bad note, but, you know, as we were saying that it seems like there's some inner turmoil going on with Carpenter at the running back position. The offensive line isn't as strong as it traditionally has been for the Badgers. And I think the appointment of Clay Helton as the full-time head coach, I think this game kind of, I think it just serves to be a better springboard for USC than an ending for the 2015 season for Wisconsin. So I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to go with USC as well. All right. We talked about it briefly, praising them, but let's get into on December 31st at 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Don't be surprised if this actually starts later than 8 o'clock, considering the other semifinal starts at 4 o'clock. But the scheduled 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time kickoff of the Cotton Bowl, which is a college football playoff semifinal on ESPN, Michigan State versus Alabama.
This one is really a very, very interesting matchup. You look at the numbers on paper, Alabama's defense is supposed to be one of the best in the country. Sparty's defense is good. I mean, they're good against the run, so will they be able to stop Derrick Henry with his 50 carries for the game? I know that Sparty's secondary is kind of suspect, and you've seen when Iowa even took a shot finally down the field, they got a score out of it. They didn't take many shots down the field, just like Ohio State didn't. So, and I know Coker for Alabama, he's kind of suspect at times. It's going to be, you know, whose defense shuts down who, obviously, because defense wins championships. So does Alabama come in thinking about their draft stock again this year, or does, you know, Sparty come in with their disrespected hat on and come out and take Alabama to the woodshed? I want to see Sparty win. I'm dying to see Sparty win. You know what? I'm going to go with Sparty just based on the simple fact that they keep pulling off the games in the end, and if it's close, that they're going to be able to roll the tide at the very end. So I'm going to go Sparty.
I agree with you. I like Sparty. I think this is going to be a very close, low-scoring game. I think, as you said, the defenses are both strong, and it's going to be watching mirror images of each other where both teams are going to line up and dare the other to beat them by throwing the ball. What it comes down to for me is the health of Connor Cook's shoulder. As we saw in the Big Ten Championship, there were some throws that Connor Cook attempted that I'm sure he wishes he could have back, but if anything, it just merely evidenced the fact that his shoulder is not 100%. If that shoulder can get healthier between now and December 31st, I think Michigan State, the fact that they came into Columbus and beat the 2014 national champion, I don't think they're going to be overawed. If anything, I think they will come into this with the right mindset. And the fact that Derrick Henry is now the Heisman Trophy winner, and that means I I agree. I felt bad for McCaffrey. He would have been my Heisman winner, but that being the case, I think Derrick Henry going around on the banquet circuit, which happens, people have kind of neglected that there's a lot of media obligations, and I think the focus it lends itself to Michigan State. So in a close one, I'm going to go with Mark D'Antonio upholding the prestige and reputation of the Big Ten. I think Ohio State fans, you may not want to hear this, but this is the team that you should be rooting for to win it all. It just makes Ohio State look that much better and tougher in the long run. The fact that we lost to possibly the national champion. So I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to go with Michigan State here.
How weird is it that, first of all, you have Saban, who used to coach Michigan State, now coaches for Alabama, both going against each other for this. And a simple fact that this is going to be the third year in a row, no matter what. Sparty's probably going to be top 5 again.
It's a credit to Mark D'Antonio.
I mean, at what point in time is this program going to get some national recognition as a powerhouse?
And unfortunately, and here's the reality, and Hondo Carpenter could probably best articulate, besides Connor Cook, who Michigan State's losing. But if anything, it's going to lead the national media to believe, well, Michigan State's going to dip next year because, of course, after they lose Connor Cook, there's no way that they will be as good as they've been the last couple of years. So it just lends itself to that, that chip on their shoulder mindset that Mark D'Antonio has done a tremendous job of cultivating up in East Lansing.
No, just like I've seen somebody tweet, and I forget who it was, so I can't give them the proper credit off the top of my head. But if Sparty were to go out and win the national championship, the first thing D'Antonio would turn around and tell his team is Ohio State's was shinier.
Probably. January 1st at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the Outback Bowl on ESPN2, Northwestern versus Tennessee.
Obviously, being a Big Ten fan, I want to go with the Wildcats. Tennessee lost to Oklahoma at the end, but Oklahoma's in the playoffs. Tennessee, they had a winning record. Obviously, Northwestern did too, but Northwestern got blanked by that team up north. It's going to be interesting what shows up. I'm inclined to go with the Wildcats, but something's telling me that the Vols, in order to try to put something together for next year and try to be the talk of next year, because that's when everybody's saying they're a year off, something's telling me that the Volunteers are going to win this game.
I agree with you. I think Northwestern defensively is very good, with the exception of obviously the games where they were blown out by that team up north and Iowa. But I think Tennessee has, too much speed. I think Butch Jones is trying to get Tennessee back into the upper echelon of the SEC, and I think this is a great way to begin the 2016 season with a win over Northwestern. I think I agree with you. I think Tennessee will take Northwestern in this one. January 1st at 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Not that we're going to be watching it, of course, because we'll be watching the Fiesta Bowl, but the Buffalo Wild Wings Citrus Bowl, that team up north versus Florida on ABC.
This just in. The Buffalo Wild Wings committee is happy that Brady Hoke is no longer coach, so he does not eat all their wings. Based on the simple fact that Florida, although they've had a winning record and whatnot, they seem to have no offense. Their starting quarterback, the middle of the season or something like that, the first couple of weeks, I forget exactly when, he got suspended for the performance-enhancing, whatever it was, situation, and it seems like they've lost their offense since then. Obviously, that team up north, their defense is pretty good, except for when I played Ohio State. So I'm going to go out and say that, unfortunately, as much as it pains me, I'm going to have to go with the Maize and Blue.
I agree. I think Florida, as impressed as I was for most of the game against Alabama in the SEC championship, their defensive performance was impressive. Their offensive performance was beyond woeful. And the Wolverines' defense Granted, it didn't do much against Ohio State, but nobody is going to confuse Florida's offense with Ohio State's offense. I think that will be the difference in a low-scoring game. I think it also really depends on the health of Jake Rudock after he was unceremoniously planted in the turf up in Ann Arbor. If he's 100%, I'm presuming that he will be. But, yeah, I believe that the Wolverines will emerge victorious against the Florida Gators on January 1st. So later on, January 1st, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the granddaddy of them all, the Rose Bowl, Iowa versus Stanford on ESPN.
This is going to be another great game. Two very good teams. I know that Iowa basically lost to the one team that was ranked that they played. But it was a good game. It was a tough, hard-fought game like we were talking about earlier. I'm inclined to go with the Hawkeyes in this, but something is telling me that a lot of the players are probably checking out because of the simple fact that they got so close to the playoffs that they're kind of disappointed. I'm going to go with the Cardinals on this one. I hope I'm wrong, but every time I pick against Iowa, they, stab me in the back. So whatever, but I'm going to go with the Cardinals.
I agree. I think Stanford, from what I have gathered, the people on the West Coast are completely outraged and up in arms for Christian McCaffrey not being awarded the Heisman. I believe this is the kind of game that will demonstrate to the Eastern time zone about what kind of a mistake that they may have made by not giving Christian McCaffrey the Heisman. As much respect as I have for Iowa, I think Stanford, this is the kind of game that lends itself better for Stanford. So I'm going to agree with you. I think Stanford over Iowa in the Rose Bowl. Finishing up the Big Ten slate of games, January 2nd, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on ESPN, the Tax Slayer Bowl involving Penn State versus Georgia.
This game, I don't even know where to go with this one. Sorry, but as much as I love college football, I don't even know if I'm going to watch this one. Based on the simple fact that, first of all, Georgia's got a heck of a lot more talent on the field than Penn State does. I know we could sit there and talk about the whole sanctions and this and that, but whatever. Georgia I believe they have an interim coach for this.
Correct.
So, because I can't even remember I'm so bad with names. But next year they're looking at, I guess, Smart from Ohio or from Alabama's defense is going to be leading them, but he's still going to be with Alabama for their playoff run, which is understandable. Based on a simple fact that you have an interim coach that came from inside already, knows the players, knows the talent, guys are probably going to play more for him, and it's more of a pride SEC against the Big Ten. Penn State not having any kind of offense, basically. Hackenberg, it's just sometimes it seems like he has something, and the majority of the time it seems like he has nothing. That offensive line for them still is suspect. I see the Bulldogs coming out of this with a win.
I agree. I think both, as you said, Georgia with the interim coaching staff, Penn State fired their offensive coordinator. I think there's it's been a problem throughout the entire season. I think Penn State's offensive line against Georgia, which has more talent and more speed on the defensive side of the ball, I think it's going to present some problems for Christian Hackenberg, which probably will be Christian Hackenberg's last game. But again, I don't want to speculate too much. So I agree. I think Georgia in the Tax Slayer Bowl on January 2nd.
What about, I don't know if you've seen our friend Kevin put on Twitter, I believe it was yesterday, the kicker for Penn State that committed to Penn State via the airplane tweeted out that he was happy to get an offer from Baylor.
I also saw something about, I think that individual, that player took a trip to that team up north also. So yeah, good luck. That's all I can say to, if you want somebody with a lot of drama, whatever program winds up with that kid, good luck. That's all I can say.
Yep. You figured that out as soon as he went on the plane to commit, thinking he was all that in a bag of chips.
Exactly. You are listening to Men of the Scarlet and Gray here on Buckeye Sports Radio, a V Sporto channel. Go ahead.
It's time now for Ask MotSaG. What's your question?
Can I kick it? Can I kick it? Can I kick it? Can I kick it?
Let's move on to our Ask MotSaG session. We have a singular question, and we kind of alluded to this earlier, and it's from our loyal fan at OSU Girl 47, and the question relates to our thoughts on Joey Bosa playing at nose guard for the aforementioned suspended Adolphus Washington. What are your thoughts about it?
I think they were gonna probably put him at nose guard because I think against Penn State they did it, and maybe some other games. Putting Joey at the nose tackle, or one of the defensive tackle positions, is good as far as you could try to block him with your tackle and guard or something, or your guard and your center. So he's going to still get double teamed and everything, but he's going to have a faster first step than any of the interior linemen compared to a tackle. So I think the advantage is going to be huge for Bosa. It's going to be fun to watch, and whoever is lining up outside of him is going to be having a lot of room to run. So I think it's a good move. I don't think he's necessarily going to be playing the whole game at that position, but I do foresee a lot of snaps. Maybe probably, 35% of the snaps that he plays might be at defensive tackle, and the other might be, at his normal position of defensive end.
I believe this is just purely speculation on my part, but I believe the idea of playing Joey Bosa at defensive tackle or nose guard is going to be dictated by the down and distance. And what I mean by that is he's obviously naturally more comfortable at defensive end. That's his natural position. However, I think on rundowns, I would not be surprised if players like Michael Hill, Donovan Munger, Tracy Sprinkle, all of the players that were going to be called upon in the event of next season anyway, I would look for them to be on rundowns to be playing. On passing downs, though, I could see, and this is kind of where we were talking about earlier against Penn State or other opponents, that rushman formation where moving Joey Bosa in on passing downs, like on third down, and depending on what the down and distance, allowing Joey Bosa to line up, like you said, at nose guard or defensive tackle, that quick step against the center, against the guards, even if he's double, triple teamed, if they bring in their running back to kind of offer up some assistance on the triple team, I think that just merely opens up the opportunities for players like Sam Hubbard and Jalen Holmes and Darius Slade and the other players that Ohio State has a tremendous amount of talent on the defensive end side of it. So that's why I think I'm not disagreeing with you. I think the idea of Joey Bosa playing it, I don't think it's going to be the entire game. I think it's going to be more of a situational based upon the down and distance. That's just my opinion.
No, that's a good opinion. I think you're probably more right. 100% right.
So this was not a Ask MotSaG question, but I've got to ask it of you because couldn't help but see our loyal fan at OSU Girl 47, as well as at Geo. Do you want to share with our audience your thoughts and plans as it relates to this weekend with Episode 7, The Force Awakens?
Well, I will be watching it as we talked before the show, and you will be watching it. I know that Geo reached out and was wondering when the show is going to be on, so that way, because he's going to be avoiding Twitter as far as any kind of spoilers.
Right.
I'm kind of in the same boat in a sense. I'm excited to see it. I am excited, but I'm not excited. It's kind of weird. I know you and I we're very close to the same age, if not the same age. So growing up in the 80s and watching the first three, which are actually technically the third, fourth, and fifth, or whatever.
Four through six. You got it.
Yeah. So the way the chronological order came out and everything is just kind of weird. But the first three that came out kind of ruined some things for me. So I'm kind of skeptical at the same time, especially since the simple fact that George Lucas isn't a part of this. This is now Disney. I don't know. So I'm kind of 50-50.
Well, I'm excited because it is Star Wars. As a proud parent with 3 children who
and your beer and lightsaber.
Well, that was actually my nephew's lightsaber, but yeah, I did have a beer. My nephew was gracious enough to allow me to play with it. So, and you were jealous of it, by the way. So
yes,
of the lightsaber.
I still am.
The reality is my children were they were all so young when the prequels came out that they've only seen the Star Wars movies, at home or at friends' homes, or my parents or their grandparents, or any. They've never actually been to a theater. So my sons are going with a friend on Friday night. One of their friends. It's actually this young man's birthday. So my sons are beyond excited, and kind of what we have said besides Twitter is we're going as a family on Sunday. I realize a few days after it comes out, but I've already laid down the stern commandment that no matter what, they can't share with me or my wife or my daughter anything, any kind of spoilers at all. So like Gio, I'm going to be very much trying to avoid Twitter, as a Friday. So I just wanted to share with at OSU Girl 47, at Geo, like you, Shannon and I are, we have a wide range of emotion and anticipation for The Force Awakens, like all of you.
May the Force be with you.
Exactly.
Or as Meatballs, may the Schwartz be with you.
There you go. So next week, in anticipation of...
Well, we got some other questions, too, I do believe.
Do we?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I know Gio asked, and this was directed towards me, we know why you hate that team up north. Why the hatred towards the Irish? Is there a story behind this? Well, me personally, there's always been the respect factor, but it's kind of like how people don't like Ohio State. People don't like USC. You get tired of seeing a winner. I mean, you and I, when we were growing up, who was, always on TV, always there, as far as the team to beat, it was the Irish and, Lou Holtz and everything. So I've got a respect for them, but recently it's kind of turned towards a hatred based on the simple fact of this whole academic scandal that hasn't become a scandal, and there seems to be no investigation and nobody setting up camp out there at South Bend. ESPN doesn't have a desk sitting out there like they would have for Ohio State for Tattoo Gate. All these investigations that happen with Tattoo Gate, everything's just kind of blah, blah, blah. Nobody's really taking anything into this whole academic thing that happened last year before the season. That's one thing. Number two, the whole thing with Brian Kelly and the way he went after one of his assistant coaches on the sideline and was plain as view to see from everybody, it just got swept underneath the rug. I don't understand it. Maybe just because of the simple fact that, actually, I'm not even going to say it because whatever. It seems that I'm sick and tired of the double standards, really.
Well, I can offer up the fact that, not to get into a religious perspective, but I am a Catholic. I wouldn't call myself a devout Catholic, but I do attend.
Sorry to hear that.
That's all right. Hey, I attend.
I used to be. I used to go to church and went to Catholic school and everything.
Yeah.
So
I went to a Catholic grade school. I attend mass, regularly, and but I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily. I guess for lack of a better term, the cafeteria type Catholic that you pick and choose what it is that you believe and follow and all that kind of stuff. But not to get into a religious discussion here. I do not have as strong of a dislike for Notre Dame as you do. I will say, from a college football perspective, that it bothers me that Notre Dame, for years, would play Big Ten teams and never joined the conference on even.
yeah, that's the other thing I forgot to mention too. But go ahead.
The fact that it seemed as though they were the beneficiaries of scheduling Big Ten teams, but never taking that final step, the natural step of joining the Big Ten. I can tell you that I work with a devout Clemson fan where I work, and even before this season, before Clemson and Notre Dame played, this individual had nothing but profane comments to make about the sweetheart deal that the ACC gave Notre Dame as it relates to bowl game preference and the scheduling. So that to me, if there is something that bothers me immensely, I'm not disagreeing with what you said earlier about the academic scandal and Brian Kelly's behavior and all those things. But it seems to me that conferences going out of their way for years, it was the Big Ten, now it's the ACC, going out of their way to I don't want to say bend the rules, but to make exceptions for Notre Dame just to get Notre Dame into their respective home stadiums. To me, it would be more of, and I kind of agree with a lot of what was said over the summer of other coaches saying Notre Dame needs to join a conference for them to be. Why are they getting such preferential treatment? So that to me is kind of where I stand on the whole Notre Dame issue.
Yeah, I agree. And I know we've talked about this, I think, on one of our preview shows, and I think maybe it was the one with Kevin, where we talked about that they need to get into a conference and stop playing games and all that. And it would have been nice to see them possibly join the Big Ten just based on the simple fact of the history and everything like that. But now, no matter what, that if they're forced to join a conference, I think the contract is until like 2027 or something like that, that the only conference that they can legally join is the ACC.
Right. So
Gio had another one, and we kind of touched on this earlier based on about people leaving early and stuff. Do you think Eli Apple and Jalen Marshall should go pro, or one more year of seasoning? I want what's best for the player. I don't know, personally. Haven't heard anything. I think that if they're trying to get the most money out of themselves as far as draft status, I think that should stay one more year. Eli Apple took a step this year and last year in becoming a better player. I think with one more season, he's going to be a lot better. Jalen Marshall, I don't think he's had that kind of breakout yet. He had a better year last year statistically than this year. So I personally, I think it would be a bad move for them to go early.
I agree. I think I want what's best for the player, but I understand the concern that a young man, regardless of whether we're talking Eli Apple or Jalen Marshall or anyone else, the concern that they have is if I stay another year and get hurt, and I have thrown away the possibility of, a lucrative lifestyle. Now, on the other hand, I agree with you. I think, speaking about Eli Apple, about Jalen Marshall, and again, I don't want to start throwing out names. By and large, the vast majority of the players on Ohio State's roster, and once they do make a determination, I can only tell you that by and large, it will not be surprising to me if there are a large number of underclassmen who do declare, but I will share with you and Gio and the rest of our listening audience that Chris Spielman has been very vocal in terms of his recommendation to these players to stay another year, that yes, they will get picked, but no, they will not get picked as high as they are either being told or that they believe about themselves. So that's not meant as a disparaging idea about their talent as much as their development that would take place with another year at Ohio State. But like I said, I feel a lot more comfortable talking about any player once a formal declaration has been announced.
Exactly.
So next week with the holidays, we will have a show. Our plan is to have a show. I guess we could say this is a teaser. We will be discussing in greater detail the new hire of former Rutgers head coach Greg Schiano as Ohio State's new co-defensive coordinator and associate head coach. Plans are being formulated as to how we will be discussing the hire of Greg Schiano, as well as the departure of Chris Ash to become Rutgers head coach.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes, we will.
So tune in next week for sure before the official holiday season.
Yes, hopefully we'll have a nice gift for everybody.
Exactly. So, Shannon, how do fans of our podcast as well as the website, how can they possibly get in touch with you or follow your work on the internet?
Well, first I want to say, again, thank you for listening to Men in the Scarlet and Gray podcast. You can listen to us on YouTube, iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, basically anywhere. Just put in Men in the Scarlet and Gray, and it should pop up for you. You can find my work, which I'm going to be, since I'm watching a lot of the Notre Dame games and starting to break a lot of stuff down, got a lot of my statistical analysis broken down. So I'm going to hopefully start writing, spitting out some posts and stuff like that here and there. You can find it on menofscarletandgray.com. You can follow me on Twitter at SMSOMMERS84. You could also, for the show, follow us on Twitter at MotSaG Podcast. That's at MOTSAG Podcast. And like us on Facebook at the MotSaG Podcast.
As for myself, I can be found on Twitter at Chip Minnick, MINNICH. I'm also a contributor not only to Men of the Scarlet and Gray, but athlonsports.com. And I have a personal blog from the mindofminnick.blogspot.com. So that's how you can find me and follow me on Twitter or on the internet or at my personal blog.
Excellent. Oh, we want to say also, biggest thing too, you can find us on Buckeye Sports Radio. It's a V-Sporto channel. You can follow them on Twitter at Buckeyes Radio. Like I said, again, thanks for listening. We'll talk to you guys next week. Go Bucks.
Go Bucks.